Welcome to Classics Confidential. I'm Anastasia Bakoyani and I'm talking with Professor Jon Solomon from the University of Illinois. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us, Jon.
My pleasure.
You're a real expert in the reception of classical antiquity on film. Would you like to tell us how you became interested in this topic?
Actually, that's an easy one to answer. I was 9 years old and my parents took me to see Ben-Hur. And this was in a downtown urban theater, old-fashioned, 1959, with curtains, balcony, and so on, reserved seat tickets. And it's a 4-hour movie, widescreen, color, very loud, quasi-stereophonic sound. I mean, it was avant-garde at the time. And I was just utterly blown away by it. At the same time, both my parents had studied Latin in school and high school. And both my older brothers had been or were studying Latin. So it was clear that I was going to be studying Latin at some point. And that combined with Ben-Hur just sort of cemented the deal. And I found Latin relatively easy compared to physics and chemistry things. And when I got to college, I declared as a classics major and went to graduate school because I couldn't imagine being functional as anything but an academic. And about my second or third year of graduate school, I was doing my coursework and ready to go. I wanted my PhD and to have a job and to teach and to do research, and I spent many hours a day, and films were popular at the time. That is, film books, Humphrey Bogart, the westerns, gangster films and so on, and there was nothing on ancients, as I like to call them. And so I decided to write it, and I rented films, and which was hard to do at the time. This was long before DVDs and even videotapes. I had to go to the Museum of Modern Art, to the Library of Congress, and then I ordered a number of films that were supposed to be shown for group things or in churches, in case religious films, or college evenings, and then I borrowed a projector from the university and managed to get through, I don't know the exact number, but it was several hundred films.
Oh, that's dedication for you.
It was, and it was very enjoyable, and it was particularly good because in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress, I was watching a lot of the so-called Pepla, the Italian movies from the late 50s and early 60s, and in each of those movies there's sequences where they just ride on horseback. They're going from one, of course it's cheap and it's easy and fills footage, plus it's scenery and color and music and so on, and I can just fast forward through those. Nowadays everybody can fast forward through everything, but it was just a great joy. So good, I have to watch this stupid scene. Same with the battle scenes. It was kind of okay. Let's get to the plot, and so on. Anyway, I wrote a book, The Ancient World in the Cinema, which was rejected by 23 different publishers.
Wow.
Yeah, because it wasn't a genre.
Of course.
It's not a genre. And there was one book on epic films, but Hercules against the Mongols is not an epic. And but I found a publisher, A.S. Barnes, who found it interesting. And then, just to fast forward a few years beyond, that was 1977, 78. So in the early 80s, mid-80s, I was coming up for tenure at the university where I was in the United States. And I didn't even put the book on my resume.
Wow. Because
not only would it not have counted towards your accomplishments as a classical scholar, but it would have been a detriment. Like, why would you be wasting your time with
watching films?
Exactly, and writing about them and analyzing them and so on. So I didn't even put it on there.
Of course, now there is an explosion of books about, the reception of antiquity, and there's a lot about film as well,
There is.
and ever more coming out.
There is. I can't really keep up with it. There's that much.
So, I mean, you obviously have noticed a big change in the decades, and of course when your book was reissued in 2001.
Yeah, after Gladiator.
So there has been a seismic change, and reception is more accepted than it was before.
It's true. And actually there's more films than ever before. Well, more big films. The first flourishing of ancient films in the even before 1910 kind of dies out in the mid-1920s with Ten Commandments in 1923, Nero 24, Ben-Hur 25, another Quo Vadis. But after that, it kind of peters out until Samson and Delilah 1949, Quo Vadis 1950. But then that kind of peters out after when the spaghetti western replaces the spaghetti sword and sandal movie, and then there was a pretty long hiatus. I mean, there's movies in between, but few and far between. But now, I mean, this really starts with the television series Hercules in 1994. Continued by Xena, and then some TV movies, one on Ulysses, and then the Disney Hercules in '97, Gladiator in 2000, and since then, so really from the mid-90s, and the Hercules TV series was the most widely watched syndicated television show in the world, so it was very successful. So from '94, this is now 20 years later, and they're still
going.
Yeah, Pompeii just came out this week. I didn't hear it was not very good, but nonetheless, we'll give it a look. And to me, it's not a matter of whether they're good or bad. It's their texts, their films. I mean, I'm entitled to my opinion, but they usually don't. I don't express them in public too much. And this one I haven't seen, so I'm just
reserve judgment.
Yes, I'm just saying what I read on my phone when I was waiting for the bus or something. But this has been 20 years, so this is really extraordinary, and it doesn't seem to be any slowing down.
No.
Spartacus. Do they have Spartacus here, the TV?
Yes.
The Stars,
Yes.
That's, again, very, very successful in that medium. And it's exciting. It's a new world where the ancients are back, and they're making very interesting things. The sequel to 300 is coming out.
Yep, actually.
In 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Another Hercules movie.
And even as you were talking about yesterday, yet another version of Ben-Hur.
Another Ben-Hur. Well, I think that's all part of the same climate. It's partly that MGM made so much money off the Hobbit that they said, all right, the way to go is to make another big movie. But actually, this is very interesting because in my reading about the 1925 Ben-Hur, which cost $4 million, that was in the 1920s. I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of money. Irving Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer at MGM, I mean, they said in their public pronouncements very clearly, this is a matter of prestige, and if you want to be a big company, which MGM would rapidly become, you need to spend a lot of money. You need these big projects, and nothing was as big as Ben-Hur in a way, or at least predictably big. So it really feeds on itself, and here we are, almost 100 years later, and the same processes are there. We want to make a big, epic, colorful action picture. Well, let's do Ben-Hur. Yeah. We already paid for the rights, 100 years ago or almost, and it's a big story, and it involves a chariot race and a sea battle and slaves and Christianity, and it'll sell. Yeah. It'll sell.
Antiquity can lend itself to large spectacle, which is precisely what usually Hollywood is looking for.
That's right, and very often so. And Italy back in the teens with Quo Vadis and Cabiria, and then Hollywood, as you say, with DeMille's Ten Commandments, and then Ben-Hur, and then in the 50s and 60s again, it does lend itself very well to it. In fact, when you look at a film like Gladiator, to try and cram that kind of big story into 2 hours or so, you lose something. You lose part of the spectacle. Now, I'm not criticizing Gladiator. I think Gladiator is a very good film. It has some. They could have done another rewrite, but to put a big epic story into the 90 to 120 minute format is a challenge, and usually filmmakers go much longer than that.
That's true.
Yeah.
Do you think our engagement with cinematic or TV receptions of antiquity inform or modify our view of our ancient sources in any way?
Ours, meaning people who have PhDs in classics, or
yes, ours as in people who have interest and knowledge of the classics.
In some ways, in part, for instance, Troy, right? So 2004. I remember reading criticism that the walls of Troy are way too high. Well, I've been to Troy. Perhaps you have too. I mean, the walls aren't very impressive. At least the walls we think were the Troy of that period. They're, 12, 13 feet high. Well, I can scale that, even at my age. And so they made them much bigger. And I think it's indicative of what cinema can do, and that is, and actually more importantly, has to do. I can spend months reading the Iliad, all the commentaries, and have no idea where Achilles was sleeping for 10 years. Is it a makeshift hut? Is it, as they made in the film, they pull up the boats onto the shore and kind of made a pitched tent, or anything in between? But the art director, the set designer, the director, and the producer who's paying for it, they need to make a decision. They need to make a hard decision that we as classicists don't have to make, and in fact don't make. And it's one of the reasons why when I view these films, when I teach them in class and so on, I'm trying to be very careful with my students, saying, judgments have to be made, and to be authentic doesn't necessarily mean it's going to sell well on the screen. And also, in many cases, we don't know what is authentic. So, but the art director has to come up with something. You can't come in and say like, well, I talked to 3 different professors, and they said, well, we don't really know, so I've got nothing for you. I mean, out the door and get somebody who can. And I think this is in a sense, this doesn't change my perception, but it certainly gives me a visual image of things that otherwise I might not have. Interestingly, when I saw Helen of Troy, which is mid-50s, Robert Wise, Warner Brothers movie, which concentrates on Helen and Paris, but Achilles plays a role, and it was played by Stanley Baker, British actor, dark hair, dark eyes, and a very stern, kind of mean look. Now, I was 6 years old at the time, so I was afraid of him, I suppose. But, for decades, that was my vision of Achilles, and now we have Brad Pitt. And not that that's replaced this Stanley Baker image, but it certainly confuses it, and so on. So, in that sense, it makes an impact. Also, in terms of the story, when I taught the Iliad before the film, before I started thinking about film, let's put it that way, in a serious manner, the Iliad, the narrative of the Iliad was the best thing ever written. As a classicist.
Of course.
And whatever flaws or incoherences or inconsistencies or incompleteness it might have, it didn't matter. It was the Iliad. Everything else paled by comparison. And that's just the way it is, the way it ends. You know, Hector's funeral. Well, there's no way to end it. You know, this is and but then when I started thinking not just about cinema, but about the tradition of the Iliad in theater and so on, of which is remarkably little. Part of the reason for that is that it is a lousy narrative. You know, it's not man meets woman and you know, action has an action climax, but then the denouement is very disappointing. So it's really hard to stage, whether on a stage or in theater or in screen. I mean, it's really hard to you have to change it.
Yeah.
You have to change it. So in that sense, when I teach the Iliad now, this is in the back of my mind, that there's something strange about this narrative that the students are going to notice that I need to explain. Why there's no romantic element, why it's not a, you know, a first act, second act, third act kind of drama and so on. Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I think once you see a film, even without meaning to, it does change the way you then return to the Iliad or other ancient texts and view them through a different lens. You can't help it.
Yeah.
And of course, since a lot of our students actually do see these films and they're very much part of our popular culture, we have to engage with them. At least that would be my argument.
Yes, very much so. And you have to keep renewing it because, especially for undergraduates, for many years I used to talk about the Clash of the Titans and show clips from it and this, and I assumed everybody knew this movie and so on. And then at some point in the 90s, it's like, no, wait a minute, they were 3 years old when this movie came out, and this doesn't work anymore. So, then Gladiator, but now, 14 years later,
already, yes.
Of course, things live on now digitally, but still, it's the same idea. Where what they really would know would be something like the new Clash of the Titans or Wrath of the Titans, even. And every time I see an announcement about another classical movie, I get excited. It's like, oh, good, this is another 10 years worth of teaching. This will take me to the end of my career. This will outlive me. At least there's something to refer to, and so on. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, yeah, we are lucky that so many films are coming because it allows us to, renew our engagement and our teaching. To move on to a different topic now, you've got a new project that you're currently working on, which is about Boccaccio and the reception of antiquity in Boccaccio.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us a bit more about what you're working on?
I'd be happy to. When I was a graduate student, I came upon the genealogy Deorum Gentilium, the genealogy of the pagan gods, and I was thrilled by the text and surprised to find there was no English translation. So when the Harvard University Press began its Aetate series of Renaissance Latin texts, where you have the Latin on one side and the English translation on the other side, with an edition in Latin, I immediately wrote to the publisher and said, I want to do this. This book has always interested me, and I'm prepared for this, technically speaking. And it's been a labor of real joy not just the challenge of doing the text and the translation, but seeing how a very intelligent, well-educated man of the latter half of the 14th century views ancient mythology, and it's very different. It's entirely different. Pandora is a man, and there's no jar or box, and it's really quite an extraordinary, because his sources were so different. So it's rather an extraordinary take on myth. I mean, you read through the pages, and you're so used to Ovid and Virgil and Homer and the Greek tragedians and Apollodorus, the library, and we just have not a canon, but there's the myths that we tend to talk about in a certain way, mostly because they were treated by the great Roman poets. But although Boccaccio cites them, he has a very different take on them. He gives them astrological analyses and scientific, as they called science, in the 14th, right? As it was. So it's really been very interesting. And then in the last 2 books of the treatise, there's 15 books, he defends the study of ancient Greek poetry because his peers frown upon the idea that he's studying these pagans. What can you learn from these pagans and so on? And so it's really fascinating. It's a big text. It's 750 pages.
Wow, that is a lot of
so it's taken me a number of years.
Yeah.
But it's really been very interesting. I look forward to the next volume.
Well, so do I, because this is, again, another lens through which we can think about our engagement with the classics, and seeing somebody who views myth so differently, it immediately makes you think, why do I, what are my preconceptions about what classical mythology is all about?
Very much so.
So greatly look forward to your book when it comes out. And thank you very much again, Jon,
My
for
pleasure.
coming and speaking to Classics Confidential.
My pleasure.